Cadillac to Katahdin to Sugarloaf, USA.
We gotta take the power back.
It's the George Hale, Rick Tyler Show. Secretary of State Charlie Summers has a busy weekend, but he's said he'd spend a little bit of time ahead of it on the PDQ or telephone line with us for the George Hale, Rick Tyler Show. Good morning, Secretary Summers. How are you?
Good morning, Rick. George, how are you today?
Oh, just fine, Charlie. Nice to have you aboard here. I hope you have a nice Memorial weekend.
Charlie, last time you were on with us, you told us about LD 1376 and an act to preserve the integrity of the voter registration and election process. And at that time you were on with us, Secretary Summers, you said that you expected there would be some pushback. There has been, and some say this will just simply eliminate same-day voter registration. Could you, for those that aren't familiar with LD 1376, could you bring us up to speed so we can put it into focus and then maybe find out what some are thinking and put some daylight into this?
Well, certainly. LD 1376, you mentioned the title, to preserve the integrity of the election process. And the idea behind that is the current system as it stands right now is putting a tremendous amount of stress on the towns and cities that run the elections in Maine. For example, what you were mentioning, absentee balloting and election day registration. This bill would end election day registration, back it up 2 days, 2 business days. So at Thursday at 5 o'clock, registration would stop, except for some extenuating circumstance. The same thing with absentee balloting. It would stop at Thursday at 5. They would obviously continue to receive ballots that have been sent in, but would not send any additional ballots out. And what that would do would be allow the clerks to get ready for their elections, give them some time to do their normal work, as well as prepare and make sure people who have registered to vote are residents of the town. They can compare all the notes that they need to do. Right now, for example, if you're talking about absentee ballots, in 2000, 10% of the people in Maine voted by absentee. By 2008, that went up to 32%. And in the year 2010, this past year, in Bangor, 60% of the people voted absentee. And when you combine that with the number of people registering to vote, for example, in 2008, in the last 2 days before the election, 4 times as many people registered to vote as did the previous 43 days. That was about 46,000 people. What we're saying is if we can just give the clerks 2 days, back the deadline up 2 days, people adjust their schedules, it would give the clerks the ability, and you have to remember, the towns and cities, as we all know, are hurting for money, they're hurting for staff, they don't have the ability to run their elections properly. And I think that if we sit back on our heels and don't do anything at all, then we're headed for a meltdown. And, you know, if we don't do something and something happens, they're going to say, why didn't you do something when you knew it was a problem? We're trying to lean forward a little bit, address the issues. We're working with the Clerks Association, who are supportive across the state, and it has, as we did mention before, has raised some concerns from people who are opposed. There are issues of people accusing us of trying to suppress the vote, which is not the case at all. People are creatures of habit. If they know a deadline is a certain day, they will go right up to that deadline. If we do a good job and let people know that the deadline has been moved back 2 days, then they will go to that deadline. And I should point out that currently in Maine there are 252 days a year that people can register to vote, not to mention they can do it by mail. If we back it up 2 days, it means there'll be 250 days that they can register to vote.
Well, you're right. And Charlie, you're a constitutional officer, and you apply the rules, and you do a good job, and just like your predecessors have done. But what's happened nationwide is, and you touched on it, and that's the reason it became a sensitive issue here, that there have been a number of voter suppression bills across the country. And some Democrats, not all, some Democrats have said, well, this is to suppress the vote and make it more difficult for college students, minorities, the elderly, and in some cases the disabled in some states to vote. And it would help the Republicans and hurt the Democrats. That's been the argument that's come down. I think you're well aware of that. Mm-hmm. So well, you're saying in Maine that's not going to be the effect.
Well, I really can't see how it would be the effect, George, because if it treats everybody the same and simply moves the deadline back 2 days, it shouldn't suppress any vote or affect anybody's ability to vote. I think should the legislation pass, and it will be debated next week in the House and then move over to the Senate, should it pass, it will be incumbent upon the Secretary of State's office to make sure that everyone in the state is aware of the change in the deadline. And again, it is evenly applied to every single person, Republicans, Democrats, independents, unenrolled. And if we reach out and make sure they know, I really think that this will afford the towns and cities the ability to try and relieve the stresses on the system just by 2 days. There were a number of proposals, George and Rick, in the legislature that would have backed it up to 30 days, which is not reasonable. In working with the clerks, in working with Deputy Secretary of State Julie Flynn, we tried to look at this very surgically and, again, devise a bill that could address the issues of the stresses on the system and at the same time protect Mainers' ability to vote and get out. And I should point out, too, that if you think back over the last 25, 30 years, voting has changed a great deal. In many states, they vote by mail. In many states, they're trying to vote electronically. The ability for groups who have particular interests in the elections to move large numbers of people to the polls via the internet, via technology, has really ramped up the ability to move people to the elections, which is a very, very good thing. But in doing so, and in states like Maine, where the elections are run by the towns and cities as opposed to other states where they're run by the counties, you're putting a lot of pressure on small towns and cities throughout the state. And they're having to react to that. And they're running their elections the way they've run them for 50, 60 years. But the technology is putting tremendous pressure, and we're just attempting to address that.
From Scarborough this morning, Secretary of State Charlie Summers. We talk of LD 1376. Its title, An Act to Preserve the Integrity of the Voter Registration and Election Process. It would back up by 2 business days before an election, new voter registration. As I'm going back to a hearing in Augusta, I think it was on May 13th, and I think that the calendar's behind me. I think that was a Friday when the Maine Town and City Clerks Association, they said, we like this, but the representation said they'd favor an amendment to still allow same-day voter registration. Would that amendment sit well with you, Secretary Summers?
Well, I think when it was Patty Dubois, who was the clerk in Bangor, she had testified along with the clerk from Fairfield, and they did testify in support of the bill, but they said, however, if it were amended only to deal with absentee ballots, that would be fine with them. My concern is it's sort of a double-edged sword, if you will. It's you have 2 very important pieces, obviously absentee balloting, registration, but they work in concert to provide, I think, a number of stresses on the system. And I think it's important that we deal with them both and deal with them equally. And if we do it 2 business days, that, I think, is the best approach to it.
Charlie, there's so many bills in the hopper that, frankly, even, Did
you say so many or too many?
I would say too many.
Okay.
I want to go back to was it 199? There was 199, there was 203, the photo ID.
Oh, the voter ID bill, yes.
Is that still alive, dead, or where is it?
It is. I believe, and I don't have my computer in front of me, so I can't tell you exactly, but I believe it is on its way to the House for debate.
Okay.
That's the voter ID bill. It's a bill that mirrors legislation in 27 other states.
Yeah, that's the one I'm getting a lot of feedback on from people who say that if that bill passes, it would disenfranchise 11% of the state's voters in a state that has the highest voter one of the highest voter turnouts in the country. I'm just saying that's the kind of email that I've been getting.
Yeah, that's an interesting bill. The Supreme Court of the United States has upheld states' requirements for photo identification, and just for your listeners' benefit, I should point out that in Maine, currently today, there are 973,000 eligible voters in Maine, and currently there are 1,066,000 driver's license / IDs valid in the state of Maine. So right now there are more IDs in Maine than there are eligible voters. The bill has been amended to include any federally issued photo identification, meaning if someone has a VA card with their photo on it, or if they have another federally issued photo identification, that would be included. It's also been amended to include any driver's license from the state of Maine, or from the United States. So if someone moves to the state of Maine and within the 30-day window of an election, and you have 30 days to change your driver's license, say they move 2 weeks before the election, they could use their Ohio driver's license and a power bill to vote. It's also been amended to include any college ID issued in the state of Maine. So they've tried to amend this bill so that there wouldn't be the issue of someone not having identification, and it would also, and I've said as Secretary of State, we would provide a Maine state identification card to any person who could not afford that.
Not too long ago, Patrick Murphy of Pan Atlantic SMS Group was on our show and shared the results of a survey, not a telephonic robotic survey, but rather a one-on-one over the telephone survey. The question: a new bill before the Maine legislature would require voters to present photo identification at the polls. Currently, Maine voters do not have to show any form of identification in order to cast their vote. Do you approve or disapprove of this new bill? And 65.3% of those responding approved. They favored Mainers having to flash some sort of photo identification at the polls. 29.7% disapproved. 5% had no opinion on the matter. So at least this one survey from Pan Atlantic SMS, Secretary Summers, indicates that Mainers are in favor of using photo ID to preserve the integrity of the voting process in Maine.
Well, those are kind of interesting numbers, and I think they reflect the fact that, in today's world, if you're going to buy a bottle of Sudafed at the pharmacy, you have to show identification. To register your little one for Little League, you have to show their birth certificate. To get on an airplane, you have to show an ID. The point is that, life has changed, especially after September 11, 2001. There's a lot more security, and I think that people are used to showing their identification. They understand it and feel as if it would somehow enhance the security around elections or help with the integrity of the process. They are willing to comply with that. And I think that, again, if that bill passes, we will have to work very, very hard to make sure that people in the state of Maine are aware of the change, and it would be phased in over a 3-election process so that, in the first 3 elections, it would be the June 2012, the November 2012, and then the following June election, people would be notified that by a date certain they would have to begin showing identification. So it wouldn't be something that immediately, the next election, they would have to show identification, because it will take a little while for people to understand that there has been a change in the law.
Okay.
And that's not to say it couldn't be repealed by a legislature down the road should a Senate and a House and a governor in the state of Maine not like the idea.
Absolutely. That's the great thing about the process, Rick.
Well, I guess to end this, I had some emails from people who were worried about people in a nursing home that want to vote. They don't have driver's licenses. Would they be disenfranchised?
Well, again, because the bill has been amended to include any federally issued form of photo identification, most people in the state of Maine have some form of photo identification, either issued by the state or federal government. And for those who cannot afford it, they would be provided a photo ID at no cost. So, at most, it's hard to really quantify the number of people who don't have photo identification. Although the statistics that I mentioned to you just a few minutes ago, there are 973,000 eligible voters and over 1 million driver's license / IDs currently valid in the state of Maine. I think that the number of people who don't have one is, in a relative sense, small. So I think we can do this by reaching out to the senior centers, to the area agencies on aging, to the meal programs, and really trying to lean forward and let people know that there's been a change in the law. And I think we can address this without too much difficulty.